I think what Burning Man reveals almost immediately is that the narrative of secularism has its limitation. We're not living in a purely secular society. We're not living in a purely atheistic construct. That's not the trend or the direction, but rather that there is a sense of mysticism. There is a sense of spirituality.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome again to the Orbis Sentry Report. We are very glad to have you all with us, and today I have our full Orbis Sentry team with Carl Teichrib and Audrey Vanderklee, our project research assistant. We're very happy to be getting started on this. Today we're going to talk about the spiritual geopolitics of Burning Man, because as we're getting ready to go to Burning Man again, we want to have an understanding of what we're doing, what we're about to face. Now, there have been some reports recently about how Burning Man is this incredibly dark spiritual place. In fact, there was one particular, I think someone who is an evangelist who mentioned that specifically, talking about how it's darker than the Satanic Temple or things like that. And we're not trying to counter different narratives about what's happening, but we want to have a realistic view. And the framing that we're looking at with Burning Man is not so much that it's some kind of dark, terrible place, but that it is a city, an earthly city. And in particular, we want to contrast this idea with what St. Augustine called the city of God. So the main idea is that Burning Man is not merely a festival, an art event, or party, or a countercultural gathering. It's not just some big party in the desert. It's a temporary city in the desert where the spiritual condition of the modern West becomes visible. And it's not really only the modern West, because this spiritual condition has and is continuing to spread over the entire earth. Burning Man gathers Silicon Valley culture, libertarianism, radical self-expression, cryptocurrency, AI, transhumanism, environmentalism, Eastern religion, occult spirituality, alien visitation narratives, sexual liberation, and global utopianism into one symbolic space. We have been to seminars that talked about every single one of those ideas at Burning Man. It is a physical city. It has roads, camps, law enforcement. There's conflict. We've seen people get arrested. It has infrastructure. There's art. There's rituals. And there's governance. It is also a spiritual city. It is filled with longing for transcendence, healing, liberation, identity, meaning, and transformation, things that people are looking for. It is geopolitical because people from many, many nations gather there. Last year, there was over 100 different nationalities. And the conflicts and hopes of those nations appear on the playa with their citizens when they go there. Now, if we look at this in understanding the idea of the Augustinian frame, St. Augustine taught that there are two cities, the city of God and the earthly city. The earthly city is formed by the love of self, even to the contempt of God. The city of God is formed by the love of God, even to the contempt of self. And Burning Man gives us a concentrated, temporary, visible expression of the earthly city. Because it is filled with people, and people are made in God's image, though that image has been corrupted because of sin, it's not 100% evil, and I think we need to keep that in mind. I wouldn't even like to frame it in percentage terms. There's good things that are going on there also, but it is the earthly city, and it contrasts with the city of God. So, what we're going to start with, and I'm going to throw this question out, is let's have a quick discussion on what does Burning Man reveal about the spiritual imagination of our age? And I'll throw this question to Carl, since this is right up your area.
Well, thank you, George. This is going to be a fun conversation. So I think what Burning Man reveals almost immediately is that the narrative of secularism has its limitation. We're not living in a purely secular society. We're not living in a purely atheistic construct. That's not the trend or the direction, but rather that there is a sense of mysticism. There is a sense of spirituality. And that's, okay, so I remember, I think it was like 2 years ago, riding across the playa on my bicycle going, it's all here. Materialism and mysticism, secularism and spirituality, and it's all merged in this one gathering point, this center space. And for myself, that's probably been a big takeaway, that this is an example of re-enchantment. And so when I wrote my book, and I was wrestling with a subtitle. I came up with a subtitle, "The Temple of Man in the Age of Re-enchantment." And so in 2017, that was my first burn. My first big burn. I went before that with Audrey and her husband Brian to a small burn in Alberta, which was very, very helpful. I mean, that really was important. I'm so glad we did that. And when I found out that in 2017, the man at the big burn was to be put in his own temple, I was like, oh, that's literally my subtitle actualized. This sense of the man has a special place. That man, not that man, but just man, humanity has this sacred, special place, not from a biblical conception, but from the kingdom of man, from the sense of this is a reflection of Babel, now just placed in front of our face. And so, yeah, that's, for myself, I think that big takeaway is that this is an obvious and glaring example that secularism is not the trend, it is spirituality.
That's really, yeah, very interesting. And that really hits on one of the main themes that we are seeing, is this pull away from a secular focus into a desire to recognize, I'm talking about on the part of the world. You know, the main competition with Christianity over the last 80 years was secularism, you know, that heavily leaned toward atheism. And that's not where the competition is from for us as believers for the next century going forward. It's going to be this spiritual pursuit, spirituality that's outside of what we believe from a biblical perspective. So,
yep, exactly.
all right.
And I know, Audrey, my goodness, we saw that already when we were at the very first regional that we attended. That sense of spirituality was there with the temple as it was set up. I mean, yeah, it's evident that we have a shift in culture, and I wish the church, I mean, this is our hope, that the church kind of understands that, catches up with that, and can address the challenge for what it is.
Yeah, I agree.
So, why don't, yeah, go ahead.
We have a 10-second delay, so just have to deal with it, I guess. As project research assistants, I thought that throughout this conversation that I would scrape the internet and pose the questions to it that George is asking, to see what the internet had to say, to see if it kind of dovetails or gives other just perspectives. And so on that question, what does Burning Man reveal about the spiritual imagination of our age? You know, Carl, you're absolutely right, George as well, that we're not battling atheism, we're battling a spirituality. And we see that in everything that we go, a spiritual component. It doesn't matter if it's, you know, politics or any festival, it's very spiritual. And the one spirituality that always goes without saying, that is always the butt of the joke, basically, or the reason that everything's wrong in the world, is Christianity. And when in March, when we went to South by Southwest and then immediately right into Paganiscon, it was exactly the same. And they almost repeated the same messaging. And so one is Silicon Valley and the other is pagans, right? And so it's the same messaging. And we're starting to even hear that same messaging within the church. the church is turning to a spirituality and moving away from the Bible, to be honest. So what the internet had to say about that was people crave inner divinity, seeing it as the ultimate reality, which focuses on autonomy and self-deification. The current imagination is spiritual, not religious, rejecting traditional frameworks while seeking transcendence through alternative means. I think that describes Burning Man. Burning Man tells us to discover the axis of one's existence and to treat the unifying of the fractured self as a sacred journey, while also asking us to balance individual identity with collective belonging, duality and unity all at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Duality and unity all at the same time. Because you can have both. Can you?
Another interesting point was they even brought up that, within a spirituality, there's generally like disciplines within that spirituality. And the internet said that even the survival hacks out there can be seen as spiritual disciplines. So like 1.5 gallons of water per person, decorating our bikes, wearing goggles, using vinegar to neutralize the dust. And so we almost use that as our disciplines to go into the earthly city of Burning Man. And it's like a rite of passage.
Interesting.
Wow, that is interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm going to read something to you guys, and this is pulled from page 184 of my book, and it's a quote from a Stanford University Press publication, The Re-Enchantment of the World, Secular Magic, and this is the subtitle, Secular Magic in a Rational Age. And I know you guys have heard me use this quote before, but I think it fits with what you just said, Audrey. If the world is to be re-enchanted, it must accordingly be re-imbued not only with mystery and wonder, but also with order, perhaps even with purpose. There must be a hierarchy of significance attaching to objects and events encountered. Individual lives and moments within those lives must be susceptible again to redemption. There must be a new intelligible locus for the infinite. There must be a way of carving out within the fully profane world a set of spaces which somehow possess the allure of the sacred. There must be everyday miracles, exceptional events which go against and perhaps even alter the accepted order of things. And there must be secular epiphanies, moments of beings in which, for a brief instant, the center appears to hold, and the promise is held out of a quasi-mystical union with something larger than oneself. I read that quote for the first time when I purchased the book, and I was like, they just described Burning Man. It's a sense to try to find the sacred within a secular context. It's holding it all together in one place. And in a sense, Audrey, that's just what you described. It all comes together in this one big experience.
Say again who the quote was from?
Yeah, the quote was from the introduction to the book, published by Stanford University Press in 2009, and the book is entitled The Re-enchantment of the World, Secular Magic in a Rational Age. So what was interesting was the book itself took a secular framework. It wasn't taking it from a spiritual side. It was taking it from a secular side. But in doing so, it recognized that there is this pull, this draw into the sacred, into what we would describe as something spiritual. I was like gobsmacked because it was an admittance.
Yeah.
It's an admittance of sorts. And it just described the Burning Man experience very, very well.
And from their perspective, they would probably look at this current extension of spirituality as the natural outgrowth of secularism and what fell short from the secular mindset. Just as Dr. Chris Koch spoke about at that one seminar we went to at South by Southwest.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because that's exactly where he was.
Yep. Materialism is failing us. We don't acknowledge the role of a transcendent creator. We're not going to bend our knee to religion, but we're going to pursue mysticism through psychedelics. We have to find some experiential answer to the problems that materialism can't give us, or to the solutions that materialism can't give us. Pardon me. Yes.
Okay. Well, very interesting. Well, why don't we let's go on and go through the main points in our outline, and we'll start with the first one is the Axis Mundi, the search for the center. Now, because the theme of Burning Man for 2026 is Axis Mundi, which is, of course, if you don't know, I guess for our listening audience, if you don't know what Axis Mundi means, basically it's the center of the world. In many different religious and mythological traditions, Axis Mundi is the center of the world, whether it's in the Norse mythology of the great tree that goes back up and down between heaven and earth, in Jewish mysticism, and in Jewish culture. In the past, they looked at Jerusalem and the first temple as that, and of course we understand there was issues with the way the first temple had gotten their worship corrupted, but then there's a sacred center. It basically symbolizes a sacred center around which reality is ordered. Now there's three kind of symbolic centers at Burning Man. There's the man, the temple, and then there's center camp. And the man is at the very center of the city, but then the whole city layout is in a circular pattern, and you have this pilgrimage to the desert. So the question isn't about whether or not people need a center, because it seems that that's one of the things that they're seeking, and Burning Man is hoping to try and answer that this year by making this the theme. The real question is, what center for us as believers, what's going to order our lives if we're not going to compromise? What do we think other people will look to as their center? And then there's many different centers that Burning Man offers. So why don't we just discuss these? That they offer the self, the body, the tribe, the earth, the temple, the man, technology, consciousness, all the nations together, cosmic unity, future of mankind. In contrast, we have a biblical idea of a sacred center, which is in the beginning it was the Garden of Eden, the original sanctuary. Then the Tower of Babel was mankind's attempt to build a false center. We recognize all throughout the Bible there's this back and forth. Some of the research indicated maybe Jacob's ladder is heaven and earth joined by God's initiative. That kind of follows along some of those lines, but that was just one vision. The tabernacle and the temple, meeting places between God and his people. The incarnation of Christ is God dwelling among men. The cross is the true center of history. Pentecost is the true gathering of nations. And the New Jerusalem is the true eternal city of God. And it exists in the kingdom today. So what do y'all think about that? Any comments?
I'm going to throw it out to Audrey. And Audrey, with that in mind, I'm going to throw one more thing on top of you. Do you remember in 2023, the Chapel of Babel? The big art piece that was
down as an example.
Out in the playa?
Because,
Yeah.
the earthly city generally talks about the new Babel, the earthly city and modernity being the new Babel. And so the earthly city is the love of self. And so Babel being a biblical Axis Monday, in the Bible, we saw it play out at Burning Man. And Burning Man, as George said, there's many centers or axes there that people go to find their center of their spirituality. And so there was a Tower of Babel art structure there that year. And it was really tall and just amazing, just full of occultic, new age, pagan, just the whole gamut of imagery and iconography, and even a confessional booth and just things like that. It was spectacular, to be honest with you, just the art that went into that. And so, and of course at Burning Man, they burn everything. And so that was one of the structures that was scheduled to be burnt. And because of the rain and stuff, it got delayed and kept getting delayed later and later into the evening until it was, around 12 o'clock at night. Well, my husband, if anyone knows my husband, he's pretty much the chatty Cathy social person of the whole group, and anybody can talk to him about anything. It's amazing how he pulls things out of people. That night, because it was cold and dreary and late at night, he was like done. He wasn't talking. We went and sat in front of the tower, wait for it to burn, and my husband was sitting there, not saying a word, almost actually dozing off while Carl and I were talking. And there's a lot of this irony in all this too. A couple sat down behind us and literally looked at my husband, Brian, and was poking him, basically wanting to talk. And it's like, hey, well, that's weird because my husband doesn't want to talk, but she does. And so they literally started talking about travels. Nothing about spirituality, nothing about the festivals, like nothing about anything, just traveling the world and all the places that we've been. And it was actually a really interesting conversation I was overhearing because Carl and I were talking about other things and just waiting for the burn. And I can't remember if it burnt first. Did it burn first?
I think so.
Okay.
I think
so.
so.
Then
Yes,
it burnt.
yes, because it was, yes.
Okay. So then it went up. The Tower of Babel's up in flames, and the irony of it burning at Burning Man, this Babel, this new Babel, this earthly city is destroying the Tower of Babel. And Brian turns to the lady that we're talking to, and my husband is a blacksmith and makes crosses. And so he just handed her a cross, looked at her and said, on your travels, trust Jesus. And she took the cross and she held it in her hand, and she looked at it and she held it in her hand. She put it up like this, held it in her hand. And then she looked at Brian and tears started streaming down her face. And she looked at Brian for like 20 to 30 seconds. Now that doesn't sound long, but if we were to sit here for 20 or 30 seconds in silence, staring at each other, that's a long time, and it's awkward.
Yeah.
Stared at Brian for 20 to 30 seconds with tears streaming down her face. And then she looked at me and she grabbed my arm and did the same thing. Nobody said anything. And then she grabbed Carl's arm, did the same thing. Nobody said anything. And then she went like this again, got up and went, okay, let's go. And I think that is pivotal in why we go, is because the conversation wasn't about anything except traveling the world. And it was just that one gesture. We don't know her story. We don't know what broke in her. We don't know anything. But because we were there and allowed to be used by the Holy Spirit in whatever fashion God willed, we don't know how we may have affected or reminded her of anything or watered any seeds. We don't know. We don't know what that spoke into. That's why we go. And that happened in front of the burning of the Tower of Babel.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And I think we've all experienced in our interaction with people that story in particular is indicative of the fact that even though Jesus has a bad reputation at Burning Man, and they make fun of Christianity in the seminars and everything, there's a lot of people there that feel quite uncomfortable with that. That's at some level deep down, they're like, I don't know that I should be just being flippant about who Christ is. And when we have the opportunity to, we are true to him, we're not going to join in mocking our Savior. We are actually going to trust him and exalt him. That makes a difference to people, and that's exactly what Brian did in that event. That's just so good. So,
Yeah,
I think.
but
Go ahead.
well, I was just going to say part of what happened in 2023, another demonstration, and this fits, George, with what you had just described, how Christianity is mocked at Burning Man. I'm not sure, Audrey, if you remember, but I think was it maybe Saturday night or Sunday night, we found ourselves at the trash fence not far from Gate, and we ended up having it was like it was in the evening because the sun had already set, but there was still light. Yeah, and we were standing there talking to a couple of guys, and they found out we were Christians. I can't remember how the conversation unfolded, but I had mentioned to this gentleman that, of all the religions in the world, Christianity is the only one that is seriously mocked at Burning Man. And he looked at me and he goes, I've been coming for years. I don't see it. I don't see it being mocked. And then gave him a couple of different examples, and he's like, oh, yeah. He wasn't a believer. He wasn't a Christian, but he was just blinded to the fact that this is a repeated theme throughout the event. You see it in the artwork, you see it in placards, and you see it in so many different ways. Stickers, camps with anti-Christian themes, openly anti-Christian themes, or mockery of Christian themes, art pieces with a mockery of Christian themes. And I found it fascinating how here's a guy who, by his own admission, has been coming for years and years. I think he even had been a volunteer within it for a long period of time. He was oblivious to the mockery of Christianity.
Yeah, that's really interesting that it's so much a part of the subtle, because I certainly don't think probably the administration of Burning Man, they wouldn't ever make that any kind of formal part of their platform or anything like that. But it's in the culture. And I remember the one thing that I saw was a flag that was a picture of Jesus, and the words underneath the flag were, "I saw that." And and of course what that's playing on is the idea that, if you're sinning, Jesus is watching, ha ha, that we don't really believe that he's real anyway, and we can do whatever we want. So yeah,
Audrey had her hand up. I know we got this little delay between us in terms of the time of the lag, but yeah.
I just remember that he also worked in the tech world, and the tech world has a spirituality of its own, and within that, it just goes without saying that Christianity basically is the devil, and we just don't discuss it or talk about it or anything, right? And so I think because when you brought it up and he didn't notice it, I think that's just because he's just immersed in that culture, and to him it just goes, it's not a big deal, right? And so I think that's what Burning Man does, is it creates in us, it forces a value around spirituality onto us, that we then at Burning Man, because it's an outward display of a modern spirituality, Western spirituality, it forces us to comply and participate and condone it without consciously recognizing that that's what we're doing. And so when in sessions at Burning Man, when we're in sessions or anywhere really, when it's always brought up as the reason everything's wrong in the world, it's almost as if it's a collective goes without saying, and it's not seen as anything that needs to be respected, as like they respect other spiritualities. Like they'd never knock, witchcraft or anything, but they just openly mock Christianity as it's just the goes without saying blanket reason for everything. And so it's interesting because scraping the internet, it said the search for the center is rooted in a universal psychological perception that the space one occupies is the center of the world, representing a microcosm of order, while the foreign realms outside represent chaos. Philosophically, this quest reflects the belief that mankind is a microcosm of the universe, serving as a bridge between the earthly and the heavenly realms. So Axis Mundi is about bridging heaven and the underworld on earth. And so you become that axis, you become that center where the underworld or the heavenly realm then gives us blessing or information or communication, that kind of thing. And you see that played out visually in shamanic practices and through psychedelics, because they then are on purpose accessing those realms. And the Bible actually tells us not to access those realms, not because it doesn't exist or it's not real, but because it is real and we don't know how to interact or discern what's coming through. And so because formal religion is out, we still naturally are craving a spirituality because we are spiritual beings. And so they perceive every other spirituality or divinity practice, anything, as a spirituality that we then must bring to earth to combat the chaos. And ironically, at Burning Man, just even the very fact of a temple is a place of grief and mourning, and a place of seeking for peace within the chaos. The very peace that they're seeking is the very peace God offers, but they reject. Any of that made sense?
That's why, yeah, it does. I think that's part of the idea behind the earthly city in the Augustinian framework is it's full of disordered loves. The loves that are meant, that God put in humanity, people being made in his image, that are meant to be ordered properly through a relationship with him, are disordered when they're separated from a relationship with him. I would also, something that comes to mind as I think about this, and I've seen this in a number of different things, in different scientific studies, and they probably talk about it a lot in Silicon Valley and people that I know that are kind of live in that world. And it's this idea of fractal geometry. And I just want to bring it out. I don't want to make a big point about it, but the idea of fractal geometry is that you see these repeatable patterns at different scales. And so the idea that there's all these different axes to the self, the body, man, the temple, the earth, technology, and us as humanity, that we are the axis mundi. We're all kind of fractal patterns. And I think that kind of idea, it's a mathematical idea, but it's, when you talk about it in that way, it's actually a philosophical idea. And so because of its connection to math, that's the kind of thing that makes the adherents of it believe that it's absolutely true. And so...
Yeah, and I'll add one more aspect to this, and this is, George, the experience you and I had at the Texas Eclipse Festival. The Texas Eclipse Festival positioned man as the individual, us, as the axis mundi. So when the full eclipse happened, and this is the whole point of having the Texas Eclipse Festival, where we had that perfect alignment between the sun, the moon, and the earth. When we were watching the eclipse take place, the whole point of having this festival, and by the way, the eclipse festivals, because this is not just one, it's an ongoing thing, is itself a subculture that fits hand in glove within the Burning Man culture. It's been around now for a long, long time. In fact, they've had solar festivals, solar eclipse festivals before and even longer than Burning Man. So for that brief point in time, that 2-minute period of time, you, with your feet grounded on the earth, your eyes to the heavens, you become that center point, that alignment point between all of the heavenly bodies, the sun, the moon, the earth, and you are the axis mundi. You are now the center of it all. And that was the intentionality. That's the kind of the flavoring, the spiritual flavoring that what the Texas Eclipse Festival was all about. That's why we had shamans doing their ceremonies throughout the entire event, waiting for this one pivotal moment when you are that hinge. You're that, or maybe not the hinge, you are like a pillar that's holding it, the energy between all of these heavenly bodies. And of course, all it is it's an astrological alignment, and it's really cool to watch. But here we have this pattern, and you just, George, talked about patterns. Here we have this pattern, and now it's a cosmic pattern, and you're in the middle of that cosmic pattern. You're the bridge within the cosmic pattern. You're the axis mundi.
And I think it's just really important for us as believers in Christ to understand that these are the things that the world feels when they're out at these events. Mm-hmm. And it's for us to be able to minister to them, to be able to show them who the true center of the earth is Christ. And that, he's the center of creation, but everything was created through him. He's separate from creation, but he's this, everything was created through him. And to understand where our true center lies, being connected to him. If we dismiss outright their view of spirituality, we lose them. Yes, Audrey, you had something to say, Audrey.
When you try to become the center and you become that thing that communicates with the divine, you're also setting yourself up to become your own God and creating your own reality and becoming the creator, a creator, not, a created being.
And that doesn't work because none of us are the actual creator.
Right. I think we have a real opportunity at Burning Man this year with our team to have conversations about what it means to be axis mundi, and to contrast, just to play this out, to play it out, to where it's going, to contrast this with the true, let's call this the true axis mundi, which is a center point where the spiritual and the physical meet and demonstrate, and where that meeting takes place, this historical center point in which all of history pivots, is the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Yes.
That is the only true axis mundi. That is the only true bridge. That is the only true center point. Because it's not just simply a psychological construct, what we're going to be seeing at Burning Man, where they're going to be playing into a sense of spirituality. It is the true center point between the physical and the spiritual. There is nothing else like it in all of history.
That's right.
Period.
Never has been.
So I think we've got a fantastic opportunity to have conversations. Really bore it right down to the resurrection of all things, because that is the true final,
sounds like
complete axis mundi.
That sounds like a good local workshop topic at Camp of the Unknown God for us to put on. Yeah.
I was just going to say that myself too, George. I was going, there's our next workshop.
Very good. Okay, stay tuned for our next episode, in which we continue to discuss Burning Man and how, in the Augustinian framework, Burning Man represents the earthly city, in which mankind is attempting to divinize himself, exalt himself, redeem himself apart from God, become as God. We'll discuss this and more. I look forward to seeing you there.